Hi, my name is Andrew, and I'm going to be presenting today about my native interviews. This was one of my favorite assignments so far because I got to basically get out of the office and, talk to people who I wouldn't normally talk to. I really try to branch out as far as who I was interviewing. I did end up doing one person from the office, Ross. I also did somebody who works at my hotel or my apartment complex, which is Catherine. And then it's someone who actually works at my favorite meat pie place down here in Australia, um, Kevin. Just a little background on each person. Ross, native Australian, he's been here for years. I grew up here, and I think only spent about a year outside of the country, and that's when he was actually traveling the United States. Catherine, similar story, but she's much younger though. Catherine's about 30 years old. There's also a native Australian. And then we have Kevin, and Kevin actually was born in England, lived there his whole life, came over here for university, and now he is working here as he goes through school. So those are a little background on each person. They each gave very interesting answers. Looking into what questions I asked, my structure for asking these questions were basically, all right, first let's ask questions that have to do with Australia specifically. So have here describe Australia in 3 words, or if you have one day in Australia, what should you do? And I did that to gauge how invested they are in their own culture, and I found that each person was very well invested. And then I kind of moved that into more personal questions. So, how comfortable are you taking risks? What cultures are most similar to yours? How would you define a successful person? And I did this format because I believe that in doing this, I can gauge, how well versed are they with their own culture, and how does it affect their answer for these other questions? And what I found across the board, was a very uniform response in the sense that their their individual cultures definitely were influenced. Their individual answers to these questions were definitely influenced by their culture. So I saw that Catherine and Ross had these very similar answers, where Kevin, on the other hand, because he's not from Australia, had a little bit different answers. They weren't as different because he's from a very comparable country from the UK. So they weren't exactly different, but there definitely was some tweaks in there. And then here I just highlighted some of my favorite questions. Just before I get into my favorite questions and the response I like the most, one question that I actually found really interesting, the answer to, was right here, where how common is college in Australia? And what I learned actually was that, and I had no idea before this, that the the stereotypical college student in the United States is pretty much only unique to the United States in the sense that, especially in Australia, they live at home. They don't live at school. So a lot of times they're going to work. Also college is only 3 years, but as they call it uni down here, they will work part time and then go to uni the other time. And so by living at home, you don't really get this like crazy college persona, which I found really really interesting. Ross was telling me how he almost wished that he lived in the United States because then he would have been able to get his kid out of the house faster. Because his son lived at home, while he was attending university. So that's one question that I found really interesting. There's also some other questions that I really enjoyed asking because I got some really cool answers. So the first question I have here is, describe your favorite place in Australia. So I got a really cool answer here from Kevin, because like I was saying, Kevin is not from Australia; he's from the UK, and his favorite place in Australia is a place called World Square. And World Square is basically a place where it's right between Chinatown and the city of Sydney. Um, so this area is where a bunch of different cultures basically blend together and gives you great diversity for food, clothes, music, and it's just a really cool place in Australia. And he said he liked it because he was were nervous that coming over here, although even though he's from the UK, from England, he was nervous that he's going to come over and kind of feel like a foreigner. But in the place like World Square, where there's bars and restaurants from all over, he never feels that way. He has a bar where a lot of other people, from Europe go to. And so, see, that's why he said he really likes Sydney, because World Square does a great job of exemplifying what Sydney really means to him, and that's a diverse place he can't call home. Next, another cool question was, describe Australia culture in 3 words. And this one I found kind of funny, because I asked the question during work, and I got So I sit near 4 or 5 other people, and everyone started chiming in like they did for the whole interview, but this one was really interesting. And before giving me a serious answer, Ross answered it with surfing, beaches, and kangaroos because he assumed that that's the response I wanted to hear. That's like the American response. And I'm gonna get more into this later, but this is just the first example that I really picked up on during these interviews that Australians completely recognize the stereotypes that Americans or the rest of the country have towards them. I don't want to explain too much because I want to say that for my Johari window, but I think that was the first time they really picked up on that. And another really cool question that I got some cool answers for was what other cultures are most similar to yours? So one response was the UK and England, which makes sense. Another response was the United States, California specifically, which I think makes more sense because California you have more your laid back outdoorsy lifestyle. And then another one was Canada, and I found Canada interesting because when I think Canada, I don't think Australia. When I think Canada, I think cold, very colder. I think Canada is much more. I've only been a couple times, but I think Canada is much more in tune with their mother country as far as France goes. And I found that the Canadian comparison very interesting. So that was definitely a response that I was not expecting. But the other ones, I think definitely, and I can see Canada also definitely having some merit as far as what makes sense. Now I'm just going to get into the common takeaways I had. First of all, Australians are very nationalistic and they're well versed in their origins. They know who founded them, how they were founded, the year they were founded, and honestly very comparable to the United States as far as knowing the American Revolution, knowing your founding fathers. So I think as far as knowing the historical aspect of it, they all do. We kind of spent some time outside of the actual questions talking about Australia as a whole in my experiences so far, and this was something that I definitely understood because I definitely understood it to be as everyone's kind of expected to know where we came from. But going off to the first part is they're very nationalistic. If you think the United States, you think go America, we're the best damn country on the planet, yada yada yada. And honestly, it's very similar in Australia. Not like criticizing them or anything. Of course, I love your country, but I was just kind of surprised by that. And with this being very nationalistic and very very obsessed with your country, basically, it comes with an alpha complex. I definitely got, a very kind of condescending alpha complex when doing these interviews because, even Kevin, who hasn't lived here for that long, kind of almost looks down on other countries and feels as if Australia is the best country. And I think that's something you can really compare to the United States, and which I found that interesting because that personally surprised me. Just kind of going off that, although they have kind of this alpha complex, they're very intrigued by the U.S. culture in particular. During all 3 interviews, they were asking me counter questions. So, I would ask, "What's college like in Australia?" And they would ask me, "What's college like in America?" And I start telling them about the binge drinking culture and the living at school and going way out of state to go to school. And they were all very intrigued. They kept asking me questions. I think that, almost by the end, I was probably answering more questions than I was asking them, which I found very cool. And I think that also led to a much better conversation because it was very open and wasn't as rigid as me just asking questions. And I think also the diversity leads to a plethora of viewpoints. I think there are a lot of we talked about politics in Australia, and because all 3 individuals come from different backgrounds, there's a lot of diversity in their answers as far as the political culture down here. They're actually going through from what I've seen on the news, they're going through a good amount of political instability. So I'm interested to see how other people feel about that. Maybe I can try to strike up a conversation somewhere else, but at least the people I talked to definitely had a different viewpoints on the political stance on here. And then the last one was, like I was saying before, they recognize how the world thinks of them, which I think is very interesting and very important. I think that's something that the United States lacks, what I was saying, but we're going to get into the Johari window because that's where this kind of gets emphasized. But before we go into that, I kind of cut off the top, but I think that both Australians know and, other people know looking in the outside, that they're laid back, they're outdoorsy, fun-loving, personal, and exciting. And I think those are five excellent words to describe Australians as far as a common consensus. If I were to walk up to an Australian and say, you would describe yourself as outdoorsy, they would say, yes, of course I would, because that's just kind of how they are. Ross constantly talked to me about scuba diving, running, just all these like outdoorsy things that but that as an outsider looking in, I'm like, oh yeah, that makes sense. That's kind of how I describe Australia as well. But then we have, not known to others but known to themselves, and this one was interesting, and I probably got the best idea for this from Kevin, because Kevin was kind of like that outsider perspective. You know, like me, he came in and had no idea how diverse it was here. And Australians view themselves as very diverse, and they take pride in it. Going off that, they take pride in being very cultured, knowing about a lot of different cultures and embracing that in their everyday lifestyle. And I think also going off of that, goes like intelligence thing too. Like I know personally, when I think Australia, I don't think market superpower of the world, economic powerhouse. No, not at all. And they view themselves like that. They view themselves as very intelligent, capable people. And this is something that Catherine was describing to me, that she has a lot of friends who are from out of the country, and that's simply because a lot of people think that they can kind of come to, and she described me as this, which I was surprised by, but a lot of people kind of come to Australia and do very well for themselves because they think that they're not as developed. They're just kind of like a recreational site, and they think that they can go there and they can be this kind of like very much more smarter person, which is not the case at all. Australians view themselves as very intelligent, forward-thinking kind of people. And then also going off that, like I said before, I didn't think that that Australians had out complex. I don't think that they're pretentious, but they are damn proud to be Australians, and they know it. They know that they know how happy they are with their country. They recognize all of that, which I love. I find it very, very almost funny, just because I never saw that coming from Australians. Then it's the last piece here. This piece right here is the known to others but not known to themselves, and this was so hard because, like I was saying, because Australians 100% are aware of the stereotypes that they get. They know that a lot of people, when they think Australia, they think crocodile hunter and surfing and beaches and kangaroos and whatnot, and they embrace it and they find it kind of funny. So that's why it was so hard to find things that that were not known to Australians, that or that other people kind of know and view them as. And I found a couple of things, and the first one was they didn't know that a lot of people think that they only eat meat. They thought that was comical when I told them, Ross was laughing when I told him that. But it's not true. First of all, they have a very balanced diet, very comparable to the United States. And as far as like being uniform from like diversity perspective, they view themselves as extremely uniform. Extremely diverse. And they were surprised that others viewed it as a very almost very Caucasian country with not a lot of diversity. They found that very, very. They didn't know that just because it's so cultured here, and it's something that you would not expect. So those were my basic takeaways. Overall, I really enjoyed doing the interviews. I think that not so much Ross, because I see him every day and I work with him. And I talk with them every day, but more so Kevin and Catherine. I think that gave me it kind of. I see them a lot too, and it was gonna kind of it was good to sit down and talk to them. I think I kind of made a friend in doing it and doing so. I think that I want to do more of this kind of interview stuff. It's definitely something I would look into more, just because I think it gives me an insider view on Australia, and it's really cool to contrast this insider view with how I perceive it. So very, very interesting task, like I said, for everyone so far. Have a great night, and I guess I'll talk to you next week. Thank you.